All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in the Gospel of John, chapter 17. We're going to get right to it, and we're talking about Jesus' prayer, the Lord's actual prayer. This is what he is praying, and he makes a statement that we kind of addressed last time. We want to jump back to it. Not that when he says that you have given me well, let's just jump to it. Why not just, I can show it better than to explain it. Here we go. Um, um, so let's see here. Back to John 17, and then we'll just do the recap here. All right, so Jesus, this is, he's finished talking to his disciples, chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. Now, this is his prayer. And as I said last time, the Lord's Prayer is actually what Jesus is praying. Now, the Our Father prayer is what the Lord taught us to pray. This is what Jesus is actually praying. And there are several prayers throughout the Gospels that record when Jesus prays. So, and this is sort of his last prayer publicly, you could say, before he is arrested. He says, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that your Son may glorify you. For you have given him authority over all flesh, so that he may give eternal life to all you have given him. We talked about that phrase here. You're giving him eternal life to all that you have given him. And not that, again, I didn't say, I by no means am I saying I'm satisfying, in terms of the depths of what that means. What we did cover is kind of what it doesn't mean, that there are only a select group of people or some people from humanity that Jesus has chosen while not choosing the other, because all can come to Jesus. And the question is, why don't they? And that's because of their own unbelief. So he says that for you gave him authority over all flesh, so that he may give eternal life to all you have given him. Okay, and so the phrase that you have given him, from God's perspective, it's something totally different than I think we can comprehend. Um, I will show you this before I move on, and I just like to show this with people, just to kind of show you sometimes language. Sometimes how we talk. Like if somebody says, "Okay, like your mother saying, if you don't stop, I'm going to knock you into tomorrow." Well, she doesn't literally mean that she's going to knock you into tomorrow, but um, um, that she's going to discipline you, right? My point is the way that we sometimes express, the way that we express language, okay? The way we express language, and that's the point that I'm saying right here. And I'm going to show you this because this is Paul in his journey when he was arrested and he's on his way to Rome. The ship has been in this horrendous storm that they couldn't get out of. And let me go back to when he says, verse number 23. He says, "For this night an angel of God I belong to and serve stood by me." Now, even with this language that Paul is speaking right here, angels are by nature servants, ministers to serve. So when he says, I serve, Paul doesn't serve angels. We don't serve angels. But notice the language that he's saying. He says, an angel of God I belong to and serve stood by me. and said, "Don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And look, God has graciously given you all those who are sailing with you." I just want to show you the language. That's all. When language is spoken, what oftentimes, what does it mean? And then, as I said, we certainly know what it doesn't mean here, that when Jesus said, "You have given me." And then, of course, we studied in John 6, "All that the Father has given me will come to me." Now, we know what it doesn't mean. In other words, we know that statement does not mean that God has only selected a few. All right. So he says, "So let me give eternal life to those you have given him." Now look at verse 3. This is eternal life. Now remember, I told you last time, when we say the term eternal life, we think to live forever. Okay, to live forever, to live without end. Now, the perspective of that is, well, let me rephrase. You have to have a kind of proper perspective. Would you want to live forever in this state? The answer is no. We know people. We know people that I'm trying to think how to say that, and I have to say this in context. Um, I'm now in the senior citizen status, and it's not all fun because the body is. I'm constantly aware of. I'm constantly aware of um, aging issues. Okay, that's putting it light. That I'm constantly aware of aging issues. Okay, so that again, I'm just aware of it. Now, of course, I'm old enough to remember. Okay, 30 years ago, life was different in terms of my body. You know, now my mind, in a sense, kind of hasn't changed. It's funny because my mind, your mind, your thoughts doesn't age. I don't know if you think your thoughts haven't aged. My mind, okay, my thoughts are the same, can be the same as when I was 30. And by that, I also mean that I have matured some. So, but so my mind is different, and then but my body the difference between 30 years is again, I'm getting older, and it's a lot different. Okay, so if I say eternal life, if somebody said to you, "Well, you can live," and in fact, there is a theology. You don't hear it much, by the way. I'm gonna tell you, it's funny. I'm gonna deviate a little bit. I'm gonna tell you this funny. I was saved in the Word of Faith movement, and I'm in debt. I'm I'm indebted to that for other reasons. But um, one of the errors of this teaching is they sold a fantasy life through what they call faith, teaching of faith, prosperity, healing. They sold a fantasy life. And one of the fantasy life is that you can live a long life before you go to heaven. So, in other words, what they kind of taught is that, life, you are promised the goods. You're promised a prosperous life. You're promised good life before you go to heaven. And you can live to be at least, they say, or the age range between 70 and 120. So this is what we taught. This is what we believed. You can live between 70 and 120. So in other words, you can die at least, at the least age you should die at is at 70. And really, you shouldn't be dying, but at least 70, okay? And so between that 70 and 120, it still should be perfect health and prosperity. So again, so the lifestyle that the Word of Faith sold, right? And so many of the teachers taught that they were going to live to be 120. And to date, none of them have. None of them. None of them have lived to be 120. To date, none of them have died of natural causes. They all died of sickness. Okay? So, it just, again. But that's kind of, so what I'm saying about eternal life, and I'm going to get to how when Jesus makes this statement here, the context of eternal life, as we may say, I'm going to live forever, does that mean in the context of living in this body right here, right now, right now? Would I want that eternal life? But watch this. Let's just say if that theology, that fantasy theology was true. Let's say it's true. The world around me is corrupt. For example, let me just say something. For example, living that day of September 11th, 2001, that day was a horrible day. And let's just say if I could boast, well, I can use my faith and all of that, but the world was stunned by that. Of course, our nation was crippled for that day by that. And when you think about the chaos around us, would I want to even live in that chaos around us? Now, notice he says, this is eternal life. And look at that, they may know you, the only true God. So the eternal life that God promised us is not the longevity of this physical life in this corrupt body, this aging body, this cursed body, right? That as you get older, and those of you youngins, you can enjoy your time, because I enjoyed it when I was your age too. When I was 20, in my 20s, my 20s and 30s, I never thought about death. I thought about death. The reality of death did hit me once with the death of my first wife. And that was I was 27, she was 27. That was a reality check right there. But even with that, I still was like, well, okay, it's not going to touch me because I got my faith. It's my faith. But it was reality. It was a reality. Wow, this. But as far as like, I didn't see death on the horizon. Death was always down that way. Of course, the reality of death and stuff. I always knew, of course, yeah, you can get an accident, even though, of course, at that time, I believe I couldn't get an accident. I had that, because I was living in that fantasy of that word of faith, theology. But you saw it around me. But so, but the real eternal life, when he says eternal life, it's not this life. Now, the promise for this body that God has given believers, the promise for this body, okay, when we say eternal life, but notice what he says right here, how Jesus defines eternal life. Eternal life is knowing God. Even, I'm going to try to, even when we think about, like, let's say death, so the hope for the believers, The hope for the believers is, even if we die, we know we're going to go to heaven. Okay, now watch this. We know we're going to go to heaven. We know that death. So even when I was going back, in the fantasy of the word of faith, but even if I knew that even if I died prematurely, right? Say if I died, like let's say like my first wife at 27, she was in heaven, and we knew that day that she passed, man, for all eternity, her suffering is over. And when you think about that, I'm thinking about it from my perspective, and everybody can think about their loved ones from the perspective of their loved ones. That from that time, she's been free from the curse. So death in that perspective is a blessing because, as Paul says, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So to go to heaven is the plus. And I oftentimes tell you, I've said it before, God thinks about death a lot different than we think about death. See, again, our perspective is here on earth. So sometimes our prayers, when we say, oh, Lord, don't let my loved one die. I prayed it, Lord, the kids need their mother. And, God has a different perspective. Kids grew up, they're fine until the day of their death, and they'll be better, right? Just like, so we all have that. If I die, if I died right now, when people say they're in a better place, and that's true, because to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. Now, I don't know what that looks like in heaven there. But here's the point that I wanted to say. That's not the point. We oftentimes think about heaven, of course, as this peaceful place with lush green grass and flowers and a nice crystal blue sky. That's kind of what we think. In fact, there's very interesting. If you go to the one I know about, it's the Billy Graham Museum in Wheaton, Illinois, and they got this kind of heavenly scene. That's what it looks like. Crystal blue sky with nice clouds and stuff, and they say that's kind of a heavenly scene. No, it's not. And we oftentimes think about, oh man, how great, how fun heaven would be. And obviously, yes, that's true, but that so misses the point. Jesus says, this is eternal life, that they may know you. Being the thing about heaven is you're going to be with Jesus. That's the thing in heaven, that you're going to be with him. Eternal life is knowing him. That's the thing about eternal life. And even Jesus' promise, when we talk about the rapture, Jesus' promise is he is going to prepare a place for us, and then he's going to come back and receive us unto himself, that where he is, we will be with him. And as Paul said, we will ever be with him. That's the beauty of eternal life, knowing him. The beauty of heaven is Jesus. Not just the beauty of heaven, all of all those little videos you have out there with people, make up going to heaven. Okay, let's say even if that's true, it's always funny because they always kind of miss, every single one of them miss the same point. The beauty of being in heaven is Jesus. That's the beauty of being in heaven. Jesus. Okay? So eternal life is knowing God. It's not just living forever. And if you stop and think about this, you are already forever. You're going to exist forever, either in heaven or in hell. So that's why the life part becomes the quality of life. And that quality of life is knowing Jesus. Knowing Jesus. If I wanted to do a weak comparison, marriage can compare to that. Right? What is the best part of marriage? Now, some women in certain traditions get married so they can get out of their parents' home. But then if you're in an abusive relationship, what is that? But the best fantasy about marriage is the person, each other, being married to each other. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.